afternoon, everybody. Very, very welcome to especially the newcomers. I do see a few new faces, and I'm happy to see you. My name is Tepo, and I do look after Curiosita, at least for now. It has been many months, but I'm loving it. And the objective, of Curiosita is that we have conversations, we talk, we liaise, and obviously afterwards we are able to just share, out of formal platforms. But I want to encourage you, when you are here, you are free to ask your questions. You're free to, have you put up your recommendations. So today's Curiosita is different in a sense that we've got 3 speakers instead of 2. Generally, we only have 2, which is a student that is doing a PhD, a doctorate, or, that is one, and then the second one will be a guest speaker from the industry. But today, we have Esti, who's a PhD student, and then we've got Egan, who has completed his doctorate, and then we've got Brian, that will be, sharing with us, about his business and his industry. Okay, so we've got those 3, and then in that way, roughly we're talking around 40 minutes each. We're starting now at 3:30 to 5:30. So I know it sounds like a lot, and it does feel like a lot after 5:30. So here we've got Dumi, and Dumi is from our research office, and he will be facilitating, or rather championing the questions that will come after ST has already done her presentation of her doctorate. So what ST is talking about, ST will be doing, her title is Process Control Mechanisms in the Aviation Industry. Okay, is that correct, ST? Okay, and ST is a Quality Assurance Manager at Execujet Aviation Group. So she will be sharing, what she's done so far in terms of her research. And, I do hope that with all these wise faces that I see, she will come out edified. Okay, thank you, ST. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Tepo has said, my name is Dumi Piti. I'm from the research office at the Vinci Institute. I think among us here, we've got different people. We have Da Vinci staff, we have our alumni, we have also current students, and we also have associates. So welcome to all of you. We hope that your input will help SD in her process. Engaging in a research at a doctorate level actually can be a very, very lonely journey. After your proposal is accepted at the Da Vinci Institute, you'd be primarily dealing with your supervisor. And maybe once in a while, you'll be dealing with us in the research office. So today's session is for us to actually to think collectively, or to help Esti to reflect actually on the journey. She's been on this journey for almost a year and a half since she started last year. And she's going to just give us a background of her research, and then I'll facilitate the discussion. And then at some point, I will open for questions from the audience. And just for you, Esti, the objective of Curiosita is just to help you to think and reflect. You are halfway. For some people, complete their a doctorate journey in 3 years. Some complete it in 6 years or more. So if you are some of those that are sprinting, you may be on the half-year journey. But if you are like some of those that are going to take longer, maybe about 2/3 or 1/5 along the way. So please feel free. This is a platform for conversation. You want to chat, we want to get to understand your research, what sparked the interest, and for more to get to know a little bit more about you. Maybe let's start with who is ST and why the interest in a doctorate?
Okay, that's a good question. My interest in the doctorate, and specifically this one, relates to how I ended up in the aviation industry, because I think the 18-year-old me didn't even know that there's any job apart from a pilot, that there's any other jobs in the aviation industry. Subsequent to finishing school, I studied fine arts and I completed a master's in fine arts. And then in 2006, I had the opportunity to do a cabin crew license. And that's how I ended up in aviation. Although initially the interest was to fly as cabin crew, I fell in love with the systems and the background and all the functions that goes to support the flying operations. So I don't have a cabin crew license anymore. I have never even renewed it because I realized that I'm not going to be using that in the future again. However, I found myself in a position where, in terms of industry-specific qualification, that I potentially had a lack there in that area, specifically because my master's degree was in fine arts. That's where my interest in the PhD started, and specifically the Management of Technology and Innovation one at the Vinci Institute. And also because of the Mode 2 learning method that the Da Vinci Institute offers, that was quite attractive to me. If we consider the focus on technology and innovation, that is very prevalent in the aviation industry. So although this PhD is not called something in aviation, I can use this framework and use it as an umbrella over what my area of expertise in the aviation industry is and build on that. So that's how I'm...
Okay. So it's been about a year and a half.
It's been about a year and a half, yeah.
So now, how did you come up with the topic for your research?
Okay. The topic for my research evolved a little bit since I started. When I initially started, I specifically wanted to look at if the regulatory framework for the aviation industry's quality assurance and corporate governance is adequate. It moved a little bit more towards how those mechanisms actually manifest within the industry. Being a highly regulated industry, there's the requirements that certain processes and procedures and elements of the business environment in aviation is regulated and very technically defined. However, within the dimension of management and control of the aviation industry, I have noticed a disconnect between some of those elements and the technically regulated elements. I mean, for example, we see in the newspapers this week again about public stakeholders who identified a lack in transparency in certain aviation providers in the country's business practices. So, in that sense, stakeholders in our country developed their perception. It's not only the perception of credibility is not only on the technical expertise of an aviation provider anymore. It is also now on the transparent and ethical and reliable business practices, also called corporate governance. So, with that in mind, I moved more towards how does corporate governance and quality assurance manifest in the aviation industry, and more specifically in the flight operations subsector of the aviation industry. Because corporate governance and quality assurance are the two portmanteau process control frameworks to actually define and regulate how things happen in an organization. It also gives the opportunity to monitor, to verify, to improve, to establish coherence, to establish harmony within the different systems, within the different elements in those systems as well.
You know, when we speak about aviation,
Yes.
actually it's not a common industry.
No.
There are certain things that we know. Most of the people here probably fly.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of what is usually known about the industry, and then compared to what you have unearthed on your research so far in terms of what is understood and not understood.
Okay. There's actually, you're 100% right. Consumers are generally only on the receiving end of the service, which means either you send a parcel via air or you travel through an aircraft yourself. But the aviation industry is it's defined as a system of systems. Now, a system of systems is more what Mayer wrote about and how the architecture of those systems, system of systems, are defined. So I'm not going to go into that right now. But within the aviation system, there's elements like infrastructure, there's elements like personnel development, there's elements like flight operations, there's elements of airworthiness, there's elements of certification. So, for example, with the infrastructure, that's where the airports, the traffic control, the weather support, and all of those things are located in the industry. Then in the personnel development, that's where the training organizations that can certify pilot competencies and cabin crew competencies and ATC license and maintenance engineer license competencies and so forth. Then if we look onto the governance level of it, that is where the civil aviation industry and the Department of Transport is. Another element of it in the flight operations element, that's actually a very diverse area in itself, because you get international operations, you get domestic operations, you get scheduled operations, you get non-scheduled operations. You get general aviation operations, you get specialized aviation operations, for example, survey, you get aeromedical operations. So all of those fall into that category. And then another category is also the airworthiness control category. That's where the maintenance of aircraft and to check that all the equipment and the aircraft remain serviceable isn't there. And all of that excludes the manufacturing industry. Mm-hmm. So there's the manufacturing industry within the aviation industry as well.
Now, when you talk of the topic of governance, mm-hmm. most people are familiar with King. Mm-hmm. We are now in King 4.
Yes.
How is governance different in the aviation industry compared to application in other industry? Is it different or is it similar?
Okay, so the big difference between King 3 and King 4 is where in King 4, they in the preface they say that the Institute of Directors in Southern Africa say that the stakeholders have now more than ever before placed emphasis on ethical reliability, and transparency. Okay, so the focus is more on the stakeholder perception on the ethical business practices and transparency in that regard. So with that in mind, if we look at the framework that's applicable to the aviation industry, we start with the South African Civil Aviation Regulations. And if we only specifically look at a flight operations environment, in other words, an AOC holder, which is an air operator certificate holder, there's the requirement to have a quality assurance system in place. Now, the function of the quality assurance system, as described in the regulations, is to monitor, verify, and correct where there's deviations from the minimum prescribed requirements and the operator-specific practices. And then it goes on to say the area of oversight and audit must include the following. And then it lists things like training, safety, airworthiness, and a few other things. But the business practices and credibility and the governance associated with corporate social responsibility is not included in there. So it aims to address it in the definition, but in the detail on what the practical and technical applications require, it's not there. So then if we move back to the King 4 report, the King 4 remains voluntary unless you are a JSE listed company. And I think some of the government parastatal organizations, then you need to have King 4. So whereas the compliance to the civil aviation regulations is mandatory for an AOC holder, the adoption of the King 4 principles is optional. So it's not enforced.
Now, Esti, one of the biggest challenges that we have noticed with the students, when you're starting in your research journey, translating your mindset. When you are working in business or in practice, you think in a particular manner.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you had in terms of translating your mindset from thinking practice to thinking in scholarship terms?
Oh, huge. Thinking in practice is a very valid point specific to my research as well, because my epistemology is pragmatism.
Okay.
So practice and the difference about thinking and acting in practice, and trying to merge that or to get that onto a scholarly level I find it quite difficult, because I've never done any other research than for specific interest or into specific regulations, or to plan a project, or something that only associates to the workplace. So it is quite difficult, and specifically the way in which arguments need to be structured in scholarly writing is also something that I find quite challenging.
Yeah.
I'm bad with grammar, bad with words, and it's very important in this area. So I know what I mean, or I know what I want to say, but I sometimes struggle to actually put it in that sequence.
Yeah. It's interesting when you're engaging with some of the researchers. They know what they want to say in their mind, but just putting it on paper, it seems like a very mammoth task. Now, in terms of the problem, how did you now move from a broader topic that deals with governance and aviation to isolating it to a particular research problem that you want to probe?
What happened in that regard is the lead up to the problem is still where my interest lies. The problem statement that I'm looking at the moment is how process control systems such as quality assurance and corporate governance manifest in the aviation industry. And if we talk about the aviation industry, that's in the flight operations subsector. So what the aim is to describe that manifestation, but then in the objectives, I break it down a little bit further to say I want to describe that manifestation firstly based on a scholarly and theoretical level, and then secondly from stakeholder perception. And then as a fourth objective, I would like to try and see what the differences are in those manifestations.
Okay.
Which means I skipped the first objective, and that is to place the South African aviation industry within the global marketplace.
All right. I think at this moment I'd like to open for questions and comments, and where it's necessary I'll ask for clarity. But before I open for comments and input from it, what is flight operations? You keep on mentioning the term flight operations, and probably some of us are not familiar with it. If you can clarify, what is flight operation?
With pleasure. Flight operations is associated with the operation of aircraft. So everything that goes around that operation of aircraft, that's the flight operations. And in order to provide a service where you operate aircraft, you need to have an AOC certificate, which is the Air Operator Certificate.
Also, it's like, let's say, SAA. For them to operate, they need that certificate.
They do need the certificate, yes.
And what are some of the requirements for it? Do you need to have like airlines that are worthy, or whatever criteria they have to meet?
That's actually a very interesting question, because the governance system in our country is on two levels. The one function that's associated with the Civil Aviation Authority is on governing the standards and and adherence to the practices and regulations. However, there's an economic regulator in our aviation system as well. That is the Air Service Licensing Council. That's an agency of the Department of Transport. Now, the Air Service Licensing Council is responsible to ensure that licenses are only issued to organizations who can show that they have the managerial knowledge and control, as well as the financial resources to provide a safe and reliable air service. Then they decide on the category of aircraft, or you can apply for certain category of aircraft and you can apply for certain types of air service, and then you go to the Civil Aviation Authority and you apply for your AOC certificate. That's where the Civil Aviation Regulations kicks in. Now, in general, you need to have certain manuals in place, you need to have qualified staff, you need to have there's 5 specific nominated post holders that by law you need to have in order to stay operational. Now, those are the accountable manager, that's the person responsible aircraft, the person responsible for operations, the Air Service Safety Officer, and the Quality Assurance Manager. And then in other cases, they also require a chief pilot, cabin crew manager, and a security officer. So it depends on what scope of approval you require, and then there's certain requirements on how to comply with that and how to set up your manuals and your safety systems and your assurance systems in order to achieve that, and all of that needs to be approved and monitored and verified.
Okay.
I've noted you, Tsepo, Rob, anybody else? Egan. All right. Let's start with the 3 and then now. Starting with Tsepo, Rob, and then Egan.
Cool. Leslie, thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure.
And thank you for what you've shared so far. But just to make it easy for everyone, I just want to maybe ask you if maybe you could just, out of your research, just give us a little summary, because I think I'm not very clear as to what the research is about or what the problem statement is. So, just maybe what the problem statement is, what is the research design, what is, what are your data collection techniques, do you have qualitative, do you have quantitative, just that,
Sure.
Even if it's over 3 minutes, maybe if out of all the sections, just cover one line, right?
Okay. The problem statement is to explore the manifestation of process control mechanisms such as quality assurance and corporate governance in the flight operations subsector of the South African aviation industry.
So, techniques.
The process control mechanisms, so in other words, like quality assurance or corporate governance, the systems and frameworks that are put in place to establish stakeholder value and meet stakeholder expectation, and to develop credibility and predictiveness in an organization's processes and activities. So that's how I defined the process control mechanisms. Okay, then in terms of, I mentioned my epistemology, my ontology is phenomenology, which is very similar to pragmatism, where phenomenology acknowledges and focuses on the subjective experience and knowledge created through the subjective experience within a real-world context. So, although subjectivity and objectivity are generally seen as opposites, within phenomenology accepts that they interact with each other to create value, but phenomenology focuses on the subjective value created through the interaction with objectivity. Then, in terms of my research paradigm, I'm looking at interpretivist research paradigm, because the interpretivist research paradigm focuses on the participant's experience. That also led me to the relativist approach of Robert Yin in case studies, where his relativist approach is specifically aimed at the perception of research participants on a complex phenomenon within a bounded system or context. And if you think about that, that's exactly what I'm doing. So that's why, and then I'm going to do a case study. I'm going to approach this as a case study, which was not initially what I planned. But the case study developed from a little bit of rework in my research. Now, case study is not seen as a research methodology. Robert Yin himself says that case study is actually is actually a typology. It's a type of research, and it is an approach to research. And within that typology, you still need to define your own methodology and data collection and things like that. That's why case study is seen as and Yin specifically sees it as a 6-step iterative process. Now, the methodology that I selected for data collection and analysis is qualitative content analysis. Because qualitative content analysis aims to get both the manifest and the latent meaning in dialogues and discourses, and even in extant text. And because I'm going to work with both theoretical constructs and research participants, that seemed appropriate as a method to use. In terms of the data analysis, it also allows for the thematic categorization and coding, which is something that Yin sees of great value in case study research. What did I miss in your question?
Look, I think you have covered, you've covered them all. Rob?
I'm also involved in the aviation industry, and I didn't realize that we had such intelligent people in the industry. There are just two other things. Firstly, you mentioned in the regulations, in that specific regulation you mentioned, there wasn't the detail to allow you to fully understand the implementation of the regulation. But that, of course, should be contained in the technical standards. And everybody has the right to make proposals in the technical standards, so you can change the technical standards.
Yes.
The other thing I want to mention is I've served on the Civil Aviation Regulations Committee for over 10 years. And there are many faults, as you know, in the regulations and the way in which the regulations are developed. And for some time now, I've been wanting to make recommendations to change that. So perhaps we could get together and help each other. You can certainly help me in trying to achieve that end.
We could. Like I said, initially my focus was more going to be on exactly that. But I moved the focus a little bit to the larger context and also to allow for empirical evidence in the situation as well, and also allow for the for research participants' participation. But I'd definitely like to catch up with you on that. I think just also for everyone else's interest, as you know, with the regulations committee and the regulatory development process in South Africa, is our Department of Transport white policy says that they don't want it to be an autocratic process. That's why there is industry consultation, where industry can make recommendations, and then where it's also evaluated on that basis through the industry, the Civil Aviation Authority, and other industry associations as well.
Okay. I think for the benefits of those that are sitting around, in the research journey, what you have proposed in your proposal does not preclude you from engaging or with other stakeholders. For example, you have now identified a possible source that you can use to test or verify some of the data that you would collect. So in platforms like this, we are hoping that people like Rob and other people who are involved in the aviation industry. Alternatively, there could be other people in other industry who could have value for her and might be able to provide input. So thank you very much, Rob. Egan?
I think you spoke about governance and quality. Do you not want to look at the impact of risk management as well in this whole focus? I mean, it's a really high-risk industry.
Yes, it is a very high-risk industry. And one of the elements that I'm bringing into the theoretical framework on quality assurance is the ISO standards. With a new revision of the ISO 9001-2015, there's a lot of risk management elements that came into that framework to ensure that although the management of quality and compliance and the management of safety is two different things, I personally view risk as the overlap between them. And that's definitely something that I'm considering, but I haven't done that extensive research onto those elements yet, but that is in the plan.
Yeah, because I know King 4, there's a major emphasis on risk management.
Yeah.
So it'll be nice if you can bring that in as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, that's just my
Thank you.
Yeah. Esti, one of the things that when people walk in at the Da Vinci, attending the first research workshops, some of them hear some of the terms. It's like even though we're speaking in English, but they actually don't fully understand. You're talking ontology, epistemology, we're talking
paradigm,
philosophy, paradigm, and things. Can you just tell us your journey in understanding these terminologies?
I must say the paradigm was the one that I had the most trouble with, because we already spoke about ontology, we already spoke about epistemology. That's most now the philosophical viewpoint. So where's this paradigm thing now coming from? But the paradigm is, if you think about it, it's the way you channel and approach thoughts. And that's exactly what it is. It is that umbrella over how you think and how you are going to do this to get the philosophical viewpoints on the same in the same boat than your methodology. So that's eventually, when it made sense, it made a lot of sense. But that paradigm thing was something different to me. The other thing that I had some trouble with is to define the sampling processes and to define the sampling, the population and the sample and those things. And I really struggled to get information on that. In the end, I found some information on ResearchGate, and I am going to approach my theoretical framework on purposive sampling, but theory-based purposive sampling. And then my engagement with the research participants, I'm planning to also do purposive sampling, but from a homogeneous group. And what I plan to do there is to have asynchronous interviews through a secure online platform. Mm-hmm. So because I think the best way, and I also have literature suggesting that as well, is that the best way to get participants to open up freely is to do a non-obtrusive approach to research, and it works the best in their own natural setting. So with this advantage that you can use the online environment to establish an online community, they can do it when convenient to them, they can do it in their own natural environment, which will then hopefully stimulate more free sharing of information.
All right. Before I ask my last question, is there anybody else who wants to comment? Nare, anybody else who wants to? Sorry, I didn't.
Sorry.
Who? Martha, okay. Anybody else? And then Paul, and then I'll ask the last questions just to close. Okay, Nare?
Hi, Esther.
Hello, Nare.
How's it, Esther?
Well, thanks to you.
It's going to be a trained question, I can see that.
Nare is one of my best friends. He gets frequent emails from me with help. I need information on ABC.
Esther, I know this is not an oral defense yet. You mentioned that a certain author said that case studies is not a methodology. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Apart from that, what other literature inspired your study? And before you answer that question, can you, in one line, just tell us what is the research question?
The research question is, how do process control mechanisms such as quality assurance and corporate governance manifest in the flight operations subsector of the South African aviation?
I'll leave that to the research officer. The question on literature.
The question on literature. The question on literature with regards to case study not being a research methodology but a research typology.
No, my question is, what other literature inspired your study? What inspired you to investigate your problem?
I think it was more rooted in frustration in the workplace, to be honest. And getting literature on exactly this topic in exactly the context proved to be very, very difficult. And you know as well how we looked for specific case studies on quality assurance and corporate governance in South Africa in aviation, and there's actually very little already written about it. In terms of other literature that sort of motivated me throughout the study was I found a few economic reports, and for example the pest analysis, which I never thought that I would actually include in my study, but I am now actually enjoying doing a pest analysis. So now I'm looking into economic literature as well. I'm looking into business management literature as well, and how that relates to the aviation industry.
Okay. Martha?
But I just wanted to find out, going into this study, did you have a hypothesis perhaps that you wanted to prove or disprove? That's the first question. The second is, what lens are you using to actually look at this? You're talking systems, so I'm thinking, are you looking at systems theory, or what are you using, if anything?
Okay. In terms of the hypothesis, yes. I started out with a research question on how fragmented is the application of process control systems in the aviation industry. So I started out with already making the judgment to say it is fragmented. So, and then I realized that maybe it's better to first look into the unit of analysis before I determine that it is fragmented. So that's how I moved away from that approach. In terms of the lens that I'm using, the lens that I'm using in terms of ontology from the philosophical viewpoint is phenomenology, which is based on a subjective experience in a real world context. But you're right, I talk about systems quite a bit, which systems theory is something that 4 or 5 years ago I didn't know about. So that is also an area that I enjoy quite a bit to read up on and to explore. The aviation system specifically is classified as a system of systems, which a guy by Mayer had a whole lot of theories about. Now, what that means is that it is a complex system, but within that complex system is a whole lot of other complex system that has managerial independence, it has organizational independence, there's emergence within that system, it is a complex system in itself, and so there's a whole lot of characteristics of a system of systems. So I am looking at it, but it's going a bit slow because I want to do it properly, and it's something that apart from the quality assurance and the corporate governance that historically and previously I didn't know much about, so it takes a bit longer.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Martha. You know, one thing, I'm hoping that actually when you're sitting here, you'd be inspired. Most of the time, people actually underestimate the level of knowledge, the level of tacit knowledge and experiences that you have. And I'm hoping that when you start engaging, coming to such platforms, you will realize that there is more that actually you can contribute. In the interest of time, we'll take Paul, and then I think I'll just close.
Yes, Paul. Yes, Paul.
Behind your back. So, I went to my first research workshop a week ago, so way behind you. But I heard this concept of megatrends, particularly with digitization. And I'm curious, are you curious about how virtual reality will play a role and how the members of your industry will learn about processes?
Yes. Process control in a digital environment is much different to what I'm looking at the moment. So I know I said yes because the answer is yes, but we need to distinguish that IT and information technology and artificial intelligence process control is an automated thing, and it happens with algorithms and a whole lot of things that's completely above me. So I won't be looking at the bits and pieces of how that influences, but in a lot of the economic reports and in the International Aviation Transport Agency and the ICAO documents, there's a lot of talk about the technological environment in the industry globally. So I do get the influences and the effect of that in extant texts like that. But the bits and pieces of those and algorithms are completely above me.
Okay. Just in closing, Esti, one of the big challenges a student have is on the planning. You're engaging in a study for 3 to 6 years. What's your plan and what's your advice for some of the current researchers and prospective researchers like Martha?
Listen, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to set time aside and to continuously keep the momentum. But you need to keep the momentum. And some progress is better than no progress. So what I've done is as you can probably see, I am a planner and an overthinker. So I compiled a study plan with deliverables and what I expect to achieve and dates of submissions and how many pages and okay. So those of you who've been through this process knows that it's a pretty picture, but I stuck to the dates. So the last draft that I submitted to my supervisor, I think was yesterday, and I actually looked at the study plan because I sort of blocked the deliverables out of my mind and promised myself that I will stick to the dates. And on the basis of some progress is better than no progress. And even if it's not a lot of progress, I will stick to those dates. Now, when I actually looked at the detail of the study plan, I was supposed to submit a final draft of Chapter 4 according to my initial plan. Okay. I'm at draft number 1 for Chapter 2.
Esti, thank you very much for your time. Everyone, after the session, we'll still have a chance to have one-on-one with Esti. Thank you very much, Esti.